Okay, so we are live with this week's episode of Startup Weekly. I'm joined by Mr. Iain Cameron McIntyre, who is the CEO and founder of Humm. So, Iain, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me this morning.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Where are you calling from, actually?
I'm in Berkeley, in California, just
Okay.
next to the UC Berkeley campus.
Nice, very good, very good. So maybe you can give us a brief introduction about yourself, a little bit about your background, as well as maybe an overview about Humm as well and how it came to be.
For sure. Yeah, so I grew up in a place called Perth, Western Australia, which is one of the most isolated places on earth. It's quite a large city comparative to a lot of American cities anyway, but it doesn't really have like a massive innovation scene. I grew up training to be a lawyer. I went through school and really loved arguing, and I also enjoyed science. So I studied science while I was at university studying law. But during college, met a couple of opportunities. I had known my co-founders since high school, and those opportunities were to do things other than be a lawyer, to run small businesses and start student organizations. And I realized that I actually really enjoyed setting my own agenda, pursuing a path, creating something from scratch. My co-founders and I had been talking since high school about starting a business together, about changing the world with technology, doing things like what Elon Musk works on, really radical ideas, moonshots kind of thing. But we stumbled across what became Humm in about 2012 when one of my co-founders, Dr. Tim Fury, was doing some medicine research on something called transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is basically putting powerful magnets outside the brain and putting an electromagnetic field in a way that causes some change that you desire. They were doing research on people with spinal cord injuries, trying to rehabilitate. I was a healthy control, but to me that research was pretty eye-opening. It was not only is this stuff very interesting to read about, it can actually cause your arms and legs to flail around when you wear it in a lab. And that was kind of the beginning of a long journey that led to Humm, which is a company that makes a wearable patch that you put on your forehead that stimulates your working memory by putting a very tiny amount of electricity into the prefrontal cortex, just underneath the forehead. Working memory is kind of the RAM of the brain, the sketch pad, the mental sketch pad. And what we found is that after several years of research and experimentation and R&D building our platform, we can build this tiny little cheap, easy to use device that people can put on for 15 minutes and for a couple of hours afterwards be able to do things like learn faster and focus easier. So we were a West Australian company. We started in parallel with some research over there, some neuroscientists over there, but decided to move up here to participate in the UC Berkeley Skydeck Accelerator, and received a small amount of investment from there and a couple of great partners that had worked with us to get to the point where we were ready to launch. And then we did a couple of things late last year. We signed a little partnership with the Air Force, and we took on a seed round from some great investors. And now in 2020, amongst all the craziness, we're working on delivering our first product.
Amazing. A great background story. So maybe we could take a little look at that journey in a little bit more detail on, how you go from seeing this technology being used for maybe rehabilitation purposes to deciding to pursue this and eventually turning it into what is now a wearable patch that you are intending to use for mass distribution for everyday people, I guess. Maybe you can speak to how that evolved and how you maybe, or why you decided to make a product like that for mass distribution.
Yeah, I think the important thing to know is that the technology has actually been around for about 30 years now. The first FDA approved device that uses technology similar to what Humm uses was back in 1990. And that was for depression, insomnia, anxiety. It was actually a device made for returning veterans of war by a company called Fisher Wallace. And that company has been around for the last 30 years. Tens of thousands of people have used its device, and it's been found to be safe and effective, and many tens of thousands of people still use it today. The technology has had increasingly exciting results in neuroscience labs for the last 30 years. There have been medical devices other than Fisher Wallace. There have even been a couple of consumer companies that have tried to take it out of the lab. The fundamental problem has been it hasn't been able to be used by normal everyday people. And that was what we really were excited by when we started working on this way back in 2012. When we started discussing this, we were excited by the idea that we could actually take this out of the lab, take it out of the medical device context, take it even out of the context of very rich people prepared to put up with, scary, hard to use, expensive devices, and actually start to give it to people like ourselves, our parents, people who are actually pursuing more difficult tasks and whose brains are being put under incredible stress relative to what we've experienced previously in our normal human evolution. I always like to say that, and I didn't come up with this, that the world has never moved as fast as it's moving today, but it'll never again move this slow. And the amount of information, skills that we need to learn, it's accelerating. And what we want to do with Humm is allow people to improve themselves at the same speed that we improve our technology, and eventually combine with our technology in a way where we're more harmoniously boosted by the interaction of our technology. And so this unlocking of these results from these neuroscience labs and putting them into devices that we can kind of democratize access to this technology through is really what impassioned us and has continued to drive us, despite this being quite a difficult proposition to work on.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah. So I guess the move to make this a more consumable product for everyday people, obviously there's different challenges that are entailed with that, maybe from a consumer perception perspective. And I guess your branding and your marketing is probably a very important piece in terms of trying to position this as a product that is going to be helpful, I guess, for people. So can you speak to a bit about that, maybe with like how you are thinking about like branding and marketing this as a remedy, or like you said, to help people learn and evolve or improve their learning skills at the same pace that maybe the world of technology is moving?
Yeah. So we've been working on Humm now as a company for about 4 years. And so I've had the chance to experiment quite a lot and interact with thousands of people, from investors to just everyday people who've never heard of the technology. And that process and that time has really helped guide us towards what we consider now being a much better version of the brand. We started off with this, we were a couple of guys that co-founded this. We were just out of university. We're all pretty interested in science. We started off, it's a pretty nerdy brand. Capital letters, very masculine, human brain mixed with machine brain. Humm stands for Human Universal Mind Machines, which was kind of our, this is what we think will be the IBM of the brain. And over time have really learned to soften it and broaden its appeal. Everything from the choice of colors to the choice of the words that we use. Really, Humm is actually an education company. This technology, to most people, I'd say 99.5% of people, is entirely new. And so we're bridging this gap of educating people on the fundamental neuroscience, reassuring them on the safety, as well as making them consider using it. And then when they use it, learning how to use it in a way that's productive for their lives. So our brand is an important component of that. It's about how we spend a lot of time considering how scientific we get, obviously wanting to maintain credibility at all times and not explain things in a way that is incorrect or misleading or anything like that, but be understandable and encouraging and desirable. And so the current brand that we've built, which is on thinkhumm.com and in our white paper and in our marketing materials around social media and things, as well as just the way we speak, the words we use, the people we work with, are all really crafted around that idea. And for that reason, we don't work with just partners like the Air Force. We work with groups of normal people who, for example, are doing lifelong learning courses in Berkeley in their later years, and try to pick what we do at every stage of the company in a way that encourages that broadening, the democratization of the technology's use and understanding.
Awesome. So that kind of leads on a little bit to the next point, maybe around like who you see as your ideal customer, or the type of people you see using it. And you alluded to it already, I guess, with the type of person who is maybe, I don't know, working on very complex problems in their typical day-to-day lives, and maybe people who are under stress for delivering certain deadlines and have high workloads. I guess, are you trying to bring it to market to a certain group of people first and then hope to broaden that? Or because by the way you've positioned the website, I feel it is quite welcoming for anybody really to utilize the product.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that we're working on live at the moment. You know, we're in 2020 deep in the midst of the manufacturing and a couple of other elements of the technical work too. But while we do that, I really focused on how we identify the best place to launch the tech. Again, in 4 years, we've had the chance to test a couple of things. You know, we started as a really scrappy, tiny little group of guys working on students, people that we really identified with and understood the struggles of. Realized after a while that we wanted somewhere with more of a business case, more of an urgent need, and less need for social proof. Students, being young, often have more of a problem with procrastination, looking to spend a lot of money on new products or things that are relatively unproven. We went into the esports market, which was really interesting. We were helping professional gamers for a little while, but realized that was too nascent an industry. Again, there were two other things that needed help. So it was in late 2018 that we first really broadened the brand and the type of people we worked with. We sold 1,000 pre-orders to people all around the world and shipped devices to a lot of people here in the United States, and started testing in the real world beyond just the scientific stuff. Like, what do people want to use this for? And we didn't give them too much guidance to start off with. We let them use it how they wanted, for what they wanted, and have continued that for the last 2 years, to the point that we now understand pretty well, I think, the right place to start this technology. It's an older group of people. You know, it is really useful for college students, but people above the age of 35 really appreciate the boost in working memory, because they've by that time tried a lot of things like caffeine and different sleep schedules, diet, exercise, and typically if not pretty optimized, at least have a pretty good understanding of the benefits of something like this and what it could do for them. And so we're really focusing on that 35 to 65 user group. Another interesting thing about that is that people just naturally over the course of their lives experience the deterioration in working memory. It's just a factor of life. Obviously, we all become much more intelligent as we get older, and I'm hoping that works for me too. But as you learn more, you know more about how to challenge different situations. But things like your working memory and short-term memory just naturally deteriorate. It's part of the healthy aging process. So these people appreciate that boost more than, say, the 18-year-old who's able to learn a language in an afternoon, that kind of thing. And then in terms of what they're doing, the first users that we're really looking at are people who are challenging themselves at work. Typically, we find they have a goal. They're working towards a professional development goal of some kind, whether it's an exam, a promotion, a body of knowledge they're looking to take on board. Like we have in our customer base, doctors who are reading studies and trying to get to the next level of their professional work, or even just trying to keep up. We have CEOs and other people who are just looking to onboard lots of information regularly, but also your normal everyday data scientist, librarian, everyone who has these goals of the next place that they want to be in their career. And the reason that's a great group of people is that we can set a couple of months of plan that we can help educate them on the new technology. We can encourage them to implement other strategies that complement Humm, like sleep, exercise, diet, meditation, and such. And also, it's important to know that this technology is not a thing you just put on and all of a sudden you're superhuman. It's something that requires the work to be put in. We give people this benefit in working memory that allows them to learn faster, retain more of what they learn, but it doesn't mean that you can put it on and just learn Python overnight. It means that if you put it on and do spaced repetition learning, which is this well understood way of studying several times a week rather than cramming before the exam, you actually get a significant improvement in the curve, the rate of learning over time, and you'll get better results. And so all of those factors come together, from people wanting to spend money to improve their work to wanting to meet a goal and being able to set a couple of months of task ahead. together to make this great launch case that we're working on for our public launch. And at the moment, we're working on our alpha, and next year early, we're doing our beta, and then mid to late next year, we're going to be launching to the public.
Amazing. Yeah. So I saw that timeline on your site, and it's interesting, and I'm sure you're facing your own challenges as well at the moment with all that's going on from maybe a logistics perspective. But maybe can you like give a little bit more insight into how the product actually works as well? And you mentioned the electromagnetics and that being associated with helping improve learning functionality, but the device itself, I guess, when it's placed on your head and it's physically placed on your forehead, I think. Can you speak to maybe what's going on internally and how it's actually working to aid people in
Sure.
learning and improving function?
Yeah, it's a great question and an important one to understand for anyone who uses our product, I think. So basically your brain is an electric circuit. It's much more complicated than a computer, and in actuality, there's no computer as complicated as the human brain yet. And not only is the brain working in electric signals, it's got biochemical things going on, it's got physical things going on. It's quite a complex organism. But one thing that we do know is that there's electric signals moving around in the brain, which are connections between neurons sending electricity to each other. And when we step back and we measure those signals with something called an EEG, which basically just gives us a really high level, big picture view of the sum of all those electric signals, we see that there's waves. We call them brain waves. And those brain waves are in different parts of the brain doing different things. But in the prefrontal cortex, which is just underneath the forehead where the Humm patch goes, we know that those brain waves are really closely correlated with how much you're concentrating and the higher executive functions of the human brain. This prefrontal cortex part of the brain is the most evolved part of the brain. It's the most different between us and monkeys, for example. And it controls a lot of the executive functioning things that we do. So the stuff that we're really challenged by in the modern world, and the stuff that is involved in learning and concentration. So we picked the electric signal that we use in the Humm patch because it had been measured over about 10, 20 years to be really closely correlated with learning. But more particularly, there was actually some really good research going on at UCSF just over the Bay, which is one of the reasons we moved to the San Francisco Bay, New York University, and a couple of other labs, correlating that signal, which is called the theta wave in the prefrontal cortex, and stimulating it with electricity, with actually perceiving significant improvements in the speed at which people can learn. And so we said to ourselves, we want to make a device, we want to make technology and further science that improves that effect, not just replicating it from the existing lab work, but also improving it over time. But first, we need a device that people can actually use in the real world. And so typically in the lab, these devices are, up to $10,000, even more. They're kind of octopus or like caps that go on the whole head. They require a scientist to twiddle here and there to connect them to a computer. But we wanted to make it something simple and easy to use. And so we basically combined the tech. I've got a couple of prototypes here in front of me in my home office. We combined the parts of the technology into this tiny little patch. There's a couple of little prototypes here with a sticky pad that you pair off here, and it's got a sticky conductive electric component, a circuit, a battery, and a couple other bits in there, which will put that electric signal into your forehead, through the skin, down through the skull and the brain and cerebral spinal fluid, and into the brain, into the prefrontal cortex. It's a tiny amount of electricity. You wouldn't believe how little it is. It's less than kind of your household batteries or your toothbrush by orders of magnitude. It's much less electricity than is in your brain. But when we put it in this very specific cocktail, we perceive this boost in that signal, that 6 hertz theta wave signal in the prefrontal cortex, that sustains for several hours afterwards. And what we find is when someone wears a patch for 15 minutes and takes it off, after that, for about an hour and a half, they're able to sit and work and perceive a significant improvement in the speed at which they can learn things and absorb information. And we've measured that scientifically from behavioral and working memory tests used in neuroscience labs, the same things that are used universally in labs across the world. And that's detailed in our white paper, downloadable on our website on the science page. And we've also done it with consumer studies with several hundred people, everyone from the Air Force to CEOs and everything in between, measuring, does it help learn things?
Cool. So, maybe forgive my ignorance on this, but how does that electrical signal maybe differ from, I don't know, like you mentioned the theta waves, and I know that like you could listen to frequencies with different types of music, let's say, or consuming that frequency audibly. And maybe I guess the question I'm asking is, how does that differ in the way that it's being used in your product versus listening to certain frequencies, maybe audibly, or something like that?
Yeah, we're actually not that dissimilar from things like binaural beats or meditation, neurofeedback, which is where you watch something on a screen that's reacting to your brainwaves. The mechanism is not that dissimilar. Basically, what we're encouraging is a shift in the brainwaves, a conscious shift that we want to happen. The difference between something like binaural beats or neurofeedback or meditation is that there's an indirect mechanism going on there. Basically, you're trying to boost certain waves within the brainwave spectrum. And when I say spectrum, I mean, when you look at an EEG, you see this massive, really complicated wave with lots of waves that are added together. It's like waves in the ocean where someone's dropped a couple of, where maybe in a lake where someone's dropped a couple of heavy stones, and those waves are bunching into each other and adding up, and they kind of look more complicated now as they ripple through the lake. What we're doing is we're boosting one particular wave within that. And the difference between meditation and neurofeedback and stuff is you're having to sit there and concentrate on something, and then indirectly your brain waves are shifting in response to that. Humm is doing that directly. We're bypassing that need to sit there and concentrate, and instead you can wear this patch, and it's directly putting the electricity in, which is causing the brain's electrical field to shift in the same way that meditation and binaural beats and things do, but quicker, more reliably, more directly. And we found that it can just be a much easier way of accessing the benefits there. When you're meditating, often, you have to spend years learning to meditate to get precise enough to get the effects that Humm gets. But people who do professionally or very often meditate have used Humm and said, wow, I can get the same effect very quickly. And then, the binaural beats and things like that, they can actually be really distracting if you're trying to work. Binaural beats being this listening to two sounds in either ear, and the difference between the sounds in terms of frequency causes a boost in the brain waves. You have to listen though to like that, and it can be really distracting. So there's a lot of similarity. People also ask, is it as safe as those things? And really, we're using such a tiny amount of electricity, it's not causing any kinds of physiological or chemical changes in the brain. It does have long-term effects in that you remember the things that you learn when you're using Humm, but it doesn't have any effects beyond a couple of hours in terms of changing the electricity or the anything else within the brain.
Okay, very interesting. In light of that, like you mentioned, people maybe question the amount of electricity being used, or wondering, is it safe? So does that prevent you from like positioning the product as like a health product, or what way do you position it, I guess, as a health product or more of a tech product, or a mix of both? And I guess that kind of goes back to the marketing stuff we mentioned earlier and how you're positioning it. But have you run into issues like by trying to position it as a health product, or are you allowed to? And what's your kind of strategy around that?
We've been pretty conscious with taking the non-health or the non-medical path. There have been those devices like the one I mentioned at the beginning, it's called the Fisher-Wallace device, that have really proved the efficacy for medical purposes. And there have been consumer devices. Halo Neuroscience made a device that was a headphone that worked on stimulating the top of the brain, which is the motor cortex, for helping people to learn physical skills faster. People like the Navy SEALs using that. And there have been a couple other instances of that kind of device. We picked to go the consumer route or the non-medical device route because we actually were able to perceive this effect, which wasn't necessarily a medical effect. You can imagine someone with Alzheimer's finding a boost from working memory improvement. But in order to actually prove that out and make it a medical device, it takes several years and several $1 million just focused on that particular problem. And those conditions are pretty complicated too. The brain is not super well understood at this stage. And so, you know, the potential for side effects and the potential for other mechanisms that cause the problems in Alzheimer's and other instances of disability to the brain are much more complicated and require more time and consideration. What we're commercializing with this first device, this working memory improvement, has been perceived to be reliable for healthy people. In our white paper, we saw a 95% of people who used it improved. It's been perceived to be very safe for healthy people because it doesn't cause any of these underlying changes. It doesn't have any side effects. And so for that reason, we wanted to go fast and we wanted to get it in as many people's hands as possible. And so we've commercialized down this consumer device route where we're making this patch, which is easy to use for many people, doesn't require the FDA to approve it in that way. We do, though, need to get a tick from the FDA to say that, and the FDA being the medical marketing and claims regulatory board in the United States, we need to get a tick from them saying that we're not letting anyone who has Alzheimer's or anything else like that, ADHD, use our product. And so when people go through our website to buy our product, they'll be completing a checklist that they don't have any of these conditions, and et cetera. And that's important to us too, because we actually do want to do the research in those areas. And we're partnered with a couple of neuroscientists now who are really interested in using this technology on people with brain injuries and ADHD and et cetera. And in order to do that research, you need good quality data that takes years to collect. So not stymieing that process by having anyone with Alzheimer's say, hey, this doesn't work, and that kind of thing is important to us too. So it's a conscious kind of multi-year strategy. This isn't going to be a quick turnaround company. We're not pursuing an exit in the next year or two, you know, like a lot of software startups I think can do. We're here for the long run. This is a 10-year thing for us. We really believe that we're doing something good for the world. And if we make money along the way, great. But it's more important to us to be able to continue to expand our reach of the technology.
Yeah. Cool. We touched on the journey already, but I guess this project, and you've been working on it since 2012, has like obviously been an evolution throughout those years, and it touches on such a wide variety of different areas from science, neuroscience, and then you're the one that's trying to pin that together into creating the actual physical product, the marketing and branding around it, building a team, getting funding. So I guess from an entrepreneurial standpoint, and for you personally, maybe how have you found that aspect of it? Have you always wanted to do that? And has this always been, I guess, kind of your North Star to do something like this? And yeah, I'll ask that first, and then we can dive into a couple of other questions.
Yeah, I think my North Star and the North Star of my co-founders, Tim and I, has always been to create the biggest impact with technology. And we saw this technology as the chance to really do that. And for that to be a thing that we worked on. And at the end of our lives, we're able to look back and say, we did something awesome for people in the world. And I think that's kind of just guided us to where we've ended up. We see this technology as just having this incredible possibility locked within it that's currently just stymied by not having grown to the point that it can. But yeah, it's also incredibly challenging. You know, I think of this in terms of Venn diagrams. I think every startup is bloody hard. And I think I think everything that we do these days can be quite hard. You know, it's not easy to be what I could have been, a lawyer working on a case in a professional development over 20 years. Not at all. In fact, it'd probably be very difficult. But we've made this particularly hard thing for ourselves out of this combination in the middle of the Venn diagram of medical device, consumer startup, hardware, software, and a couple of other things too. You know, hardcore science and even particularly neuroscience are quite difficult. But that challenge is the definition of the opportunity too. You know, it's if we can combine successfully these multiple ways of thinking, these multiple ways of doing things, and best practices from all of them, without the hardware problems preventing us from moving as fast as a software company, or the medical device regulations preventing us as moving as fast as a consumer company, then that is the essence of the opportunity. And I think that's just what a moonshot is. You're aiming to do something really difficult that very few people think is possible or could achieve without very, particular circumstances. Because if it comes through, it will be an incredible thing. for the world and for you as a company. And so that's in essence, I guess, what we're up to.
Amazing. Yeah. So in light of that, you've had to, like, I guess, build a team around what you're doing and raise funding. I guess from an entrepreneurial standpoint, how have you enjoyed that or found that experience? You've obviously made the move from Perth to UC Berkeley, and that's a physical journey, but there's also the element of building a team around what you do. And how much has that team play into the business and bringing it to the stage?
Yeah, it's another one of the big challenges, right? Like, I think especially for a first-time entrepreneur doing a startup, really knowing the difference between someone who's very intelligent and capable and someone who's really good for a startup, especially at the stage you're at, is a skill to learn and a body of knowledge to learn. Thankfully, I've been very lucky. The couple of guys that I started working with back in 20, whatever it was, were not only also really smart, but really passionate about the idea and resilient enough to persist through this initial science that we had to do, and then the shift to America on short notice, and then the really scrappy couple of months that we spent here without any money and that kind of thing. And then we've evolved as we've grown, and naturally, by being part of the UC Berkeley Skydeck ecosystem, I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of incredible people who've mentored me, introduced me to the right people. You know, we were really lucky at all stages. Back in Perth, we had this great ecosystem of people who really wanted successful startups to come out of Perth, and in the University of Western Australia, where we come from as well, wanted this science to become commercialized and pushed us to get to America. And here we have great access to this group of networks of investors and talented startup entrepreneurs and other people we can learn from, scientists too. So it's really we've been very lucky. Also, I think having a very difficult but incredibly exciting problem, people are naturally aligned towards helping us. And so that's been awesome. You know, introductions have been easy to come by. The Berkeley Skydeck Accelerator, people were very excited about our technology. And so we had a couple of really great people come on board who are still with us today, like the founder of Guitar Hero, and one of the guys who was on the board of Strava, the consumer app, for a long time, who really guided us. But I think the most important thing is the team, the internal team. And it's really just been about finding who are the people who are experienced, passionate, and agile enough to sit at the very beginning of this technology and the very beginning of a company that is going to be a 100-person company, hopefully within a couple of years, but we're now only a 10-person company, and do 3 jobs at once. Be comfortable with science that takes time at the same time as commercialization activities. You know? This is probably a topic you could talk about for like 30 hours straight. A combination of the fact that we've been lucky, we've been helped, and we found a couple of excellent people at this early stage are really propelling us forward.
Amazing. Yeah. So I guess over that period, there's been, I'm sure, a huge amount of lessons learned and things you've gone through with your team and with yourself, I guess. So maybe from an entrepreneurial standpoint, is there any kind of standout lessons that you could generalize to help founders or entrepreneurs in the pursuit of doing something for themselves?
So I always give this little caveat. I think we're a super weird company, right? This is a very moonshot, very like I said, the combination of a couple of different parts of the Venn diagram. So a lot of the things that we've learned are probably pretty particular to companies like us. But that being said, I think there are definitely some generalizable things. I think co-founder relationships determine your success, and your co-founders and early team as well determine your success. And so you've got to invest in excellent people, tight feedback loops, sharing between each other, pushing each other, but also supporting each other, and really good support networks. And if you don't do that, nothing will happen, because you can have the best idea, you can have the best implementation strategy, but if you can't stick through the really hard times together, you know, the roller coaster goes up and down, sometimes 3 times a day, let alone months and weeks, then you're doomed. And I was lucky and have worked hard on that and have done well as a result. And my co-founders, and Tim and Chris, who was with us at the start too, the same. And I think that, yeah, that really is the most important, because it sets the scene for everything else. But then in terms productively of kind of like, how do you go forward, and I think in a generalizable way, how do you keep pushing? It's about rewarding yourself and keeping yourself excited. You know, you're in a startup, you can perceive that there's a million problems ahead of you, and maybe you solved one today. You may still feel like you're at the very bottom of the mountain. Your team also will feel like that if you don't tell them that they're making progress. But if you together celebrate that one step, even if it's a side step, you know, we learned that this was the wrong thing to be working on, and now we're working on something else. That progress is what keeps you going. And when you look up at the top of the mountain and you say to yourself, I am getting there, even if it's incredibly hard and taking a long time, you will be able to better keep going. And it's about communicating that amongst your team, celebrating it, but also talking about how we're going to take on the next steps, having learned from what we've done and the mistakes we've made. I think that that's very generalizable. I've seen a lot of startups in the Skydeck Accelerator succeed and fail as a result of getting that right and wrong. And I'm sure that the numbers are just as much, if not more, the case for general startups outside that accelerator ecosystem.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Great words of wisdom. So maybe just to wrap things up, when, I guess, maybe you can shed some light on the roadmap for your product. I think you said 2021 was going to be for when you're hoping it to be available for commercial release, but maybe you can just let us know what the timeline or the plan is at the moment, and when people can expect it.
Yeah. So we invented the patch basically last year after a couple of years of working on different parts of the technology and different parts of the science. And so we put it out that we were going to release it in 2020. Unfortunately, we hit a couple of snags in the road. Coronavirus basically melted down the manufacturing partner that we were working with. But at the same time, we decided to increase our vision for this first product, and that kind of came alongside taking on some extra capital from Blue Yard Capital and CRCM Ventures, who have encouraged us, and we're working with them to increase the amount of software in our vision, and that means really bringing forward some of the stuff we were wanting to work on in the longer term to do with data collection from people, and using that to power the neurostimulation that's in the patch in a way that makes the product even better. And so we pushed the timeline for launching the first product back to mid-2021 as a result, which gives us the chance to work on a much bigger alpha and beta than we've ever done before, to really improve the product and everything from the hardcore science inside the product to the customer experience. This is our first product. I hate this way of explaining it because unfortunately it sounds like it's a trick, but it's not. This first product is really a kind of Trojan horse. It's the very first, very simple iteration of this technology. And we've got patents and work in the lab going on that are much bigger in terms of vision for what this stuff can do. That being said, this is very intentional. We want this to be as cheap and easy to use and not scary as possible, so that as many people can use it, partly so that we can grow as a company and raise more money and work on those harder problems. But then also partly because really just the introduction for people to using this technology before they're more comfortable using some of the more developed stuff. You know, behavioral change required to sit and electrocute your brain is pretty big. The behavioral change to sit and electrocute your brain and get this dashboard of cognitive metrics and implement changes in your life is even bigger. And so that's the stuff that we want to work on the next couple of years. It's stuff that I think will be pretty revolutionary. It's really difficult, but we're having some early success internally working on it. And in the meantime, just really focused on making this patch a successful product, which launched to our first 1,000 customers. We already have a couple of corporate partners, of which the Air Force is the first, and there'll be many others. And then the general public too. And it's an exciting time. It's also a weird time. You know, there's been a lot of change in how people work in the last couple of months. And I think those changes will continue to resonate throughout 2021, 22, and 23, right? In some good ways and bad ways that we're still learning, but I'm confident and I'm pretty excited for the next couple of years. And there's a big watch this space, I think, that people should have towards this field of technology in general, but also I think Humm will be doing some cool stuff for the next couple of years.
Awesome. Okay, Great to hear. Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in that space. You obviously know a huge amount more than I do, but it's been great to chat. Iain, thank you very much for your time. And I wish you the very best with building Humm over the next few years.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on. It's been great.
Cheers.